32 hot takes in 64 minutes. That's right. Top training camp issues for every NFL team coming up next on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. It is the first week of 5 daily fantasy football podcasts, starting with Nick Whalen and myself. We will be here every Monday. We are excited about it. We got a lot to talk about today. We are so happy to do this. We have 3 awesome sponsors. Big thanks to Circa. We can't wait to be going to Circa again. Just got back from Circa for the RotoWire Summer Conference. Nick and I will be going there to kick off their Survivor and Pick'em contest. You'll hear more about both shortly. Reality Sports Online and Fantrax. Appreciate them all. And, of course, we're on the Blue Wire Network. Nick and I, we just did some segments at the Blue Wire studios at Wynn Casino in Vegas. Awesome time there.
Awesome time out in Vegas. I feel like I always need like an extra week to recover after that trip. You know, it was a long travel day last Wednesday. Finally got back to Milwaukee. Had a nice little golf weekend with the fellas. So kind of able to reset now. And, you know, we're kicking off our full podcast schedule for the NFL season. So not only will you hear us every Monday, but you'll hear the rest of the guys, you know, Monday through Friday. We'll be putting out a ton of content during the preseason, leading all the way up to week 1. And then at that point, you know, we kind of transition to more of a weekly recap pod. We'll continue to have that suite of podcasts throughout the year. So it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, can't wait. Should be just a blast. And we're really looking forward to all this here. So let's launch into our topic for today. It is 32 takes in 64 minutes. That's right. Nick and I are going to try to confine ourselves to 2 minutes per team. This is a nearly Herculean task for us. It's right up there with cleaning out the stables as far as like all the doing that here. But we're going to try it nonetheless. So here we go. AFC East, top training camp issue. Who do you got first, Nick?
Well, first of all, like you said, we will have to do our best to try to keep this to 2 minutes. Historically, every time, you know, we or other podcast hosts that I've done this with have tried to do this, it's very easy to think you're being concise, and all of a sudden it's been 5 minutes. So we'll try to keep this quick. As far as how I went about this, you know, some of them, I would say about half of the teams, I took the AFC, you took the NFC. I kind of posited a question and then have some kind of sub points beyond that. But, you know, in general, we didn't structure this too much. It's one issue. It's one thing pertaining to fantasy, one thing pertaining to the upside of these teams that could make or break the season. And we'll start with the AFC East, and I'll start with the Miami Dolphins. To me, this was pretty obvious, Jeff. It's just, can Tua stay healthy, right? And, you know, I think the concussion issue is one thing. I mean, the other injuries that he suffered are another. You know, we talked a lot about this during the season last year, toward the end of the year. It's like, yes, in some ways, everything kind of resets in 2023, but you know, if he has a concussion week 3 of this season, all of what we went through last year is going to be drenched back up. I think there's still the accumulation factor with Tua. And obviously we saw what this team was when it was the Skylar Thompson show instead of Tua. If Tua is healthy and plays 16 or 17 games, I think this team can win the AFC East. I think they have that much upside. I think they could be one of the best and most well-rounded fantasy teams in the entire league. So, you know, it's a little bit of a softball to start out with, but I really think that's the obvious question for Miami.
Absolutely. And his status obviously dictates everything else on this team too. You know, Tyreek Hill's a first-round player with him. He's maybe not without him. Jalen Waddle is definitely hurt by a lack of Tua if that happens here. We do have job battles. We'll watch that a little bit there. The running back position. Dalvin Cook might still sign with them. Who knows? We'll see. But what do we make out of that running back spot? We'll hold off on a deep dive on that. I think it is really all about Tua. So absolutely agree with you on that one there. How early are you willing to draft Tua?
I'm not really a big Tua guy in general. I haven't been grabbing him. I'm doing a ton of best balls. Our friends at Underdog were courteous enough to give us some promo cash. I've been hammering those. Just started another one earlier this morning. I don't have any Tua yet.
None.
We'll see. I'm sure I'll grab him at some point. But I just haven't done it yet. I'm still kind of scared off with the injury risk, but the numbers are really stark. I know Warren Sharp had a great tweet this morning of where the Dolphins ranked in a bunch of key passing stats with Tua, without Tua. It's that
massive,
stark, right? And the one thing we should mention is they do have Mike White, right? So it won't be, if Tua does miss any time this season, it shouldn't be as dramatic of a fall off as it was last year, where it was just clearly night and day for that offense. So they have a higher upside backup, but at the same time, he's still not Tua. And then you briefly touched on this. We won't get into it. We have no time for that. But I did have a note on the running backs. For as great of an offense as this is, we're excited about all the playmakers. I mean, Mostert and Jeff Wilson were 25th and 30th, respectively, in PPR running back rankings last season. So I think we think of this as a Mike McDaniel running offense. They have all these options. They add A-Chain. But what does that mean for fantasy? Right? It might be a good running offense, but are any of those guys going to be a top 25 fantasy back this year? I don't know.
Yeah, I want to be all aboard the A-Chain, but I don't think it might be difficult to do. I was going to make a Mike White Lotus joke, but we're going to move on because we're out of time. What's next?
We are. Let's go to the New England Patriots. Is Mac Jones the guy? And how long of a leash will he have this season? And, the latter part of that sentence is what I'm most concerned about, right? Because last year, it was the most un-Patriots-like thing of all time to kind of have this midseason quarterback versus offensive coordinator versus head coach versus backup quarterback controversy. You got fans, chanting for Bailey Zappi in a primetime game. These are not things that happen to the New England Patriots. This is Commanders, this is Jaguars, this is Texans behavior. This is not the New England Patriots. And that Pat's mystique, it feels like every year since Tom Brady left, it's kind of degraded. Can the Patriots recapture that? Can Mac Jones, solidify himself as this quarterback? Do we get to week 9 and are there people still saying, they took this guy in the first round, but I don't know if he's the guy. Beyond that, a couple quick points I'll bring up. Juju Smith-Schuster, Devontae Parker, these are their guys at receiver. Is that a good enough 1-2 duo in the modern NFL when it feels like every team has a really good premier receiver that you feel good about? And then I think something that's gone really undercovered right now is Mike Gesicki in New England. He was tight end 9 in total value 2 years ago in Miami. He was just not a good positional fit with Mike McDaniel, just completely fell out of favor. I think we sniffed that out early on last season. He's not in a fantastic position in New England. There's going to be competition for snaps. But again, this was a guy who was a top 10 fantasy tight end 2 years ago. Can he recapture that?
Agreed. Big questions there all around. Big loss in not getting DeAndre Hopkins, getting outbid by the Titans, who I don't think anybody thinks, and we'll get to them, but I don't think anybody thinks that they're a playoff contender this year. So, it's, or at least a Super Bowl contender, maybe a playoff contender in the mighty AFC South, but who knows? Let's move on as we tend to do here. Okay. Next in the AFC East, what do you got?
We'll save the AFC South for last, by the way. That is by design, as some listeners of the pod may have guessed. Let's go to the Buffalo Bills. And, to me, the Bills have the most pressure on them of any team this season. This is a Super Bowl or bust season for Buffalo. It kind of felt that way last year, but the fact that they didn't even, make it to the AFC title game, I think adds even more pressure to this team. And, I think like Cincinnati, these are two teams in similar situations. That window is going to be there as long as you have the star quarterback, but it seems like there's a little bit more uncertainty with this Buffalo team. I think this is the year they have to get it done. Fantasy wise, Devin Singletary's out. They have some new blood. We'll see a lot more James Cook at running back. But to me, one of the biggest questions is this receiving room beyond Stephon Diggs. And we could do a whole 2 minutes on Stephon Diggs, but this is kind of the post-hype Gabe Davis season, right? I mean, there's a lot of Gabe Davis love going into last year. I was guilty of it. I was all over him. The boom weeks were still there, but there were a lot more down weeks than we expected. They didn't really do anything to shore that up. I mean, he's still expected to be that number 2 guy. You got Khalil Shakir, but after that, there's really nothing in that receiving core in terms of proven commodities. So Buffalo's kind of running it back and expecting more out of Gabe Davis this season.
Yeah. Are you buying into Kincaid being the guy that takes extra targets and becomes maybe the second option at some point in time?
I don't know if he could get to the second option. I like Kincaid a lot, one of several rookie tight ends who I think could make an impact. I mean, much needed infusion of talent at that position for fantasy this season. But I'm not really, buying him above ADP at this point. If anything, I mean, I'm buying back in on Gabe Davis. I mean, I was reaching for him. I felt like last year, I mean, now he's
fourth round Gabe Davis. That's right.
He's like wide receiver 41 in NFFC leagues.
Yep. Yeah. And maybe that's the thing is he is boomer bust.
He is.
He is really that guy. I expecting him to do anything more is probably expecting too much. The NFFC last year, we could draft after the Thursday night game and have your stats banked for that Thursday night game. And he went way up after that game. I might've been guilty of that.
Oh, that was the Rams game, right?
It was indeed. Yeah. All right. Last team in the AFC East, the Jets. What's their issue?
The New York Jets. I have several issues for the New York Jets. I think this is a high upside team, of course, a much higher upside team than last year. First and foremost for fantasy, when is Breece Hall 100%? Is he 100% for week 1? Is there a kind of startup period for him, even if he's back for week 1? Do they introduce him slowly? Is it a J.K. Dobbins situation where they say he's 100% and then he doesn't quite look 100%? He takes a week or two off and comes back and is in and out. You and I talked on the radio last week with Alan Soslowski, and I think we were kind of on the same page with maybe we need to pump the brakes a little bit here with these second-year running backs coming off of a serious injury. Javonte Williams in Denver, we'll talk about him later as well. So to me, fantasy-wise, that's the biggest question. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers brings a much, much higher floor and a much higher ceiling to this passing game. How much does he elevate Garrett Wilson? In general, the optimism seems to be very high on Garrett Wilson, but I think the biggest question mark for this offense is this the worst offensive line of Aaron Rodgers' career, right? I think a lot has been made about the skill position upgrades. If Breece Hall's healthy, the running back room looks great. The receiver room is really deep. I think the defense should be really good again. Sauce Gardner, has already established himself as a top 3 corner in the league. But, if Mekhi Becton can't hold up, if this offensive line, is a downgrade from what Rodgers had in Green Bay, I think that's what could ultimately be the downfall of this team, because they're in a really, really competitive division, right? I mean, that's a pretty big question to say, this might be a bottom 5 to 7 O-line in the league.
Yeah, it was last year, but it shouldn't have been. But they had all those injuries. Becton's a huge key to that there. It reminded me every time Bakhtiari went down, it seems like that was an issue there for him in Green Bay. Not as extreme, perhaps, as it is here, but definitely worth watching there. I think it's going to be watching. And then, of course, there's the Breece Hall question, too, about what, when's he going to be ready? We're going to go more than 2 minutes on the Jets. Sorry, unfortunately there. But, I mean, that I know there was a note that just came out today saying he expects to be ready for week 1, but it was more of a he was quoted as saying this in the past sort of thing there too. So we're kind of waiting to see what happens at training camp. That's one I'm definitely watching.
Absolutely. I mean, you got to remember Breece Hall was essentially on pace to be the rookie of the year before he went down. So I don't want to pour water on that. Like, I love Breece Hall, the player. I tend to be more risk averse in these situations. I mean, running back to me is really deep this year, much like receiver. I mean, he's going off as RB12 right now in NFFC drafts since June 1st. I mean, I think given the risk profile, I would take someone like ETN over him. Even Aaron Jones, who I know is going like 10 picks later. I think he's become really underrated. We'll talk about him when we get to Green Bay. But taking Breece Hall, inside his min pick right now in NFFC is 16. Like, that's wild to me.
Yeah, and the thing is, a fully healthy Breece Hall could be a first-round player. I mean, there is that upside.
Oh, no question.
But man, it's just so difficult. And this is another team that's been rumored to be flirting with Dalvin Cook too. So, obviously that's one linchpin we haven't yet seen. Him and Zeke. I don't think Zeke moves the needle as much, but honestly, I think Cook could be just as cooked as Zeke. I don't know. I wasn't even trying to pun there.
That's 2 puns. You're 2 for 2 now and through one division.
Yeah, I know, right? I got to keep rolling here. All right.
NFC East.
Hey, what do you know? Dallas is next up. Tony Pollard era. Are you buying on the price? We talked about this a little bit. He's RB7 since July 1st in the NFFC. A lot of good news coming out of OTAs and minicamp. We'll find out in about 2.5 hours whether or not any long-term extensions go for players on the franchise tag. That Dallas has already said that they're not going to give him their long-term deal, but he has also said he's also signed the tender, unlike Saquon, unlike Josh Jacobs. We got a question. Okay. Are you paying RB7 price for Tony Pollard?
I'm willing to do it. You know where I stand on Tony Pollard. I love Tony Pollard, and we should mention he's coming off of an injury. It's a bone injury as opposed to a ligament like Breece Hall. So to me, I think there's a little bit less caution that needs to be taken there. I mean, when you consider who he's going around, I mean, he's basically going like 1 pick ahead of Josh Jacobs, 1 pick ahead of Derrick Henry on average in NFFC drafts. I'm pro Derrick Henry. Again, that's another player we'll talk about later. I think we're praying a little too early on his downfall. So I would take Tony Pollard, somewhere in the RB7 to 9 range. His mid pick is 13, max pick 34 in NFFC. I'm totally fine with that. I think things are trending in the right direction for this Dallas offense. Obviously, we need to see a Mike McCarthy play calling season, but before we fully judge,
do we really need to see this?
We've seen it in the past. We have seen it in the past. We certainly have. But this is what we've been asking for the last 2 years, right? Is Tony Pollard in this situation? And we finally get what we want. And, I don't think we can complain now that it's happened.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I tend to be the guy that fades injury. I tend to be injury pessimistic, if you will. And this is certainly, a situation there. Like, you probably won't see me getting Breece. We were talking Breece Hall earlier. You probably won't see me drafting Breece Hall in a lot of places. You won't see me drafting Javonte Williams in a lot of places. You probably won't see me draft Pollard in a lot of places, especially now that the price has gone to second round pricing. I know in the wild west of like March and April and May drafts, you saw him go in the 4th or 5th round sometimes. I'm just probably not doing that. All right. Okay. New York Football Giants, Saquon Barkley. We're going to find out in mere hours whether or not he's come to an agreement on a long-term deal. What recourse the Giants have if he doesn't sign the franchise tag or they don't come to terms of the deal, what recourse he has. That's going to permeate over all of Giants camp. It is going to be the overriding question. It's going to be Lev Bell-esque if he doesn't sign.
It is. I think that's the best comparison. And it's really difficult. And, I think we can kind of compare and contrast Barkley and Josh Jacobs. And again, maybe we'll have news on this in the next few hours, but there's more pressure to be on Saquon Barkley because of team context, right? I mean, the Giants finally got things moving in the right direction. Daniel Jones gets his money. Saquon wants his money. And, it feels like obviously without Saquon Barkley, this is a completely different team. If he goes as far as Le'Veon Bell and sits out the season, I don't think the Giants have anywhere near as much upside as they did last year. I don't think they could take that next step as a franchise. So I think there's a lot riding on the team kind of doing right by Saquon Barkley and doing what it takes to get him in camp. I mean, fantasy-wise, he's going pick 14.5 right now in NFFC, just behind Jonathan Taylor. I think if we get good news on Saquon, he probably flip-flops when Taylor becomes the RB4, but he's got a lot of ground to make up, to pass Bijan Robinson for that RB3 title. So in terms of like how that contract, if it gets done, affects his ADP, he's going to rise a few spots, but I think he's going to kind of settle in that RB4, RB5, no matter what.
So I'm taking Taylor over him. I'm taking Bijan over him. I'm taking Chubb over him.
Ooh. I
might take Henry and Pollard over him too. Okay. Because I'm pretty pessimistic. I think this is going to go into, we'll get to the Raiders later, but I think that's even more dire of a situation. Sure. But wow. I mean, I think at first I thought, he's got a good relationship with the team, the coach, the good vibes on this, Dable and all that. I mean, the stuff that's come out lately is very acrimonious sounding. So maybe I'm just a little Chicken Little here. So we'll see. But yeah, right now I'm moving him down a couple of spots for sure. Late second round is where I'm looking at before I take him. All right, move on to the Eagles. Very hard to find like a dire issue for this team. It's, everybody expects them to be the top team in the NFC or the Niners, and it's pretty clear it's those two. So for me, it's the job battle, Swift and Penny. And the thing is, I don't think it gets resolved in the training camp or the preseason. I don't think it gets resolved in week 1. In fact, it might not get resolved. It might be this game is a Penny game. This game is a Swift game.
Yep.
We'll see, how many games Penny gives us also for that matter. And I don't think they get rid of the other running backs on this team either. I think how are you handling the Philly running backs is what I'm going to pose to you.
I've avoided it in Bestball. Honestly, I don't think I have any of these guys yet. Rashad Penny has always been an injury risk. I think he's looked fantastic basically every time he's been healthy, but you can't count on that. And you mentioned, you alluded to Gainwell and Boston Scott. I mean, they love having this depth, right? And they're not afraid to use that depth. I mean, this is not a team that I think wants to have a single bell cow running back. And they have 4 guys who they trust in this rotation right now. So, I think Swift and Penny to me are kind of in similar zones. 2 guys who, when healthy, have looked fantastic. But you can't necessarily trust them to stay healthy. We're picking nits with what I think is probably the most complete team in the NFL right now. But as far as the running backs go, I'll take one of those guys late in the draft. I'm not targeting any of them. The other question I have is, are AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, can they be like Reggie Wayne and Marvin Harrison? Both top 10 receivers in fantasy last year. Can they continue to be that for the next 3 to 4 years?
I think they can be. I think they can be chasing Higgins. And I think there'll be one week where it's one guy more than the other, and I think that'll get a little frustrating at times. But you look at the overall sum of stats, and I think you'll be pretty pleased. One more note on the running backs. Penny is RB39 right now. Swift is RB23. Now it's full point PPR in the NFFC. Scott Fishbowl, that you get a quarter point per carry, and you get a point for first downs. Also, so I think Penny in that format has a little bit more value. I took Penny in the 10th round in that draft.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think that checks out. Obviously DeAndre Swift going to be a little more valuable in PPR. He's going in the Cam Akers, Dameon Pierce, Rashad White, Miles Sanders range. To me, I think that's just right. Like Miles Sanders versus DeAndre Swift, I think it's going to be a really, really interesting ADP battle over the next month.
I agree. All right, let's move on to the Commanders. Washington Commanders. Sam Howell, can he uphold or support a legitimate offense when you've got
Mhm.
Terry McLaurin, Jahan Johnson, Curtis Samuel, you got two running backs, Robinson and Gibson. There's no safety net. Your backup is
Yeah.
Jacoby Brissett and Jake Fromm. So there is no real good pivot here. So can Sam Howell be that guy? What sort of trust do you have?
It's such an incomplete grade for me, right?
Yeah.
The Commanders to me are very similar to the Atlanta Falcons in a lot of ways, where it's like I really like a lot of these pieces. You know, they're not when you kind of run through and say like, man, who are the best offensive groups in the league? It's like, you know, Falcons and Commanders are not two teams that come to mind. But then you head over to RotoWire.com and you look at the depth charts and you're like, man, McLaurin, Dotson, Curtis Samuel, I like that. Obviously, Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson, you know, ended up being a pretty solid duo last season. And I think Atlanta has even more upside at those positions. But you just say, okay, you know, can Sam Howell support this? Can Desmond Ridder support this? And I don't know how you could say confidently one way or the other, right? I mean, last year was not exactly, you know, an audition season for Sam Howell. He's going to get every chance that he has. I will push back, and you know, you said there's no safety net. I think Jacoby Brissett's the ultimate safety net, right? I mean, every year we come in just kind of joking about this guy. He always ends up on some bad team, and he always ends up playing pretty well. So, you know, if it comes
He
down
played
to Howell,
okay. Let's not overstate it.
look at some of the advanced numbers, man. He was a better quarterback than Deshaun Watson for the Browns last season.
Well, that's true.
I'm just saying, if Sam Howell, you know, busts out in a bad way, you know, the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, I don't think it's like a lost year all of a sudden for McLaurin. The question is, if Sam Howell's decent, if he's an average quarterback, like how high can McLaurin climb? Because I think he's somebody that we'd be talking about as maybe another level up in terms of pure receiving talent. He just has not had the quarterback play at all thus far in his career.
That's true. That's true.
I mean, he's still top 15 fantasy receiver last year.
Our buddy Chris Listet came out with a snarky 150 and said that McLaurin is on the Allen Robinson career path here. So
he is. He really is.
We'll see. I hope that's not right, but yeah, I hope Howell's good. But you know, they threw him into the fire in week 18 when he did. Yeah, we don't need to relitigate Riverboat Ron not knowing that he could not make the playoffs, but I just did. So I suppose so. There you go. But you know, with a full training camp, full season listed as a starter, we'll see how things are a little bit different. But you know, a fulcrum guy because you know he could very well drag down Terry McLaurin or he could lift him. We'll see.
Yeah, he absolutely could. Should we go to the AFC North?
Let's do that.
All right, let's start with the Pittsburgh Steelers. One of my favorite teams to evaluate this year. And I think this might be the best division in football top to bottom. You could kind of, I really like Cincinnati. And, you know, it's a shame that, I was given the AFC, so you can't really, you know, go off on your Bengals. But I think every team in this division improved or, you know, at least stayed the same in Cincinnati's case. And that's a good thing when you're, you know, top 3 or 4 team in the NFL. Pittsburgh, to me, you know, I think maybe we could lump them in with Atlanta and Washington. At least we got essentially a full season of Kenny Pickett last year, so we have a better evaluation point. But he's one of those guys too, where it's like I love the rest of this roster. You know, D'Andre Johnson, even with shaky quarterback play last year, continues to be a target hog. I think there's some major TD progression coming for him as long as those targets sustain. Obviously, everybody loves George Pickens. I am a huge Pat Freiermuth guy. Anytime I wait on tight end in a draft, he's the guy I'm trying to get later on. I think this team has a higher ceiling than a lot of people would expect if Kenny Pickett takes even a small step forward, right? I think he was better. He was better than people gave him credit for, especially towards the end of last season. He's not. I don't know if he's one of those guys that we could see make like a Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow type of jump. I don't know that he has that talent level, but I also don't know that he has to get there for this team to be really good. The question is, you know, can he improve, and did this team improve enough to keep pace with a team like Baltimore that I think will be one of the most improved teams in the league year over year? A lot of people love Cleveland. Obviously, Cincinnati is going to be a playoff or a Super Bowl contender, I should say, annually at this point. So a lot of upside with Pittsburgh, a lot of questions, certainly. And you mentioned Allen Robinson. Can he just be a passable number 3? You know, I think the days of like, can Allen Robinson recapture the guy he was 4 years ago? Like last year proved pretty definitively that that's probably not happening. But can he be their Tyler Boyd?
Good questions all around. And you know what? I think, you know, as Goodfella points out, they did improve their offensive line, which should help too. Pittsburgh, New England, they're in this trap where, you know, you spend a first round pick on Pickett, but it's not like you're so overly enthused that, hey, we got to go roll with him here. We got to go this route. But at the same time, like, what other alternative do you have? How else can you get good quarterback play? Right. There's not really an improvement out there. And you're once you spend a first round pick on a player, you're kind of committed to giving him the 3-4 year shot.
Yep.
Very rare. You see Arizona give up on Josh Rosen right away, but rarely do you see that happen at the quarterback position. So very interesting spot to be in there.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be, kind of an astronomical bust to be a first round pick and be given up on right away. And like Pickett, I think already played well enough in year one that he's going to get that leash. Now,
Agreed.
you can make the Mac Jones argument. I think their rookie years were very comparable. And then obviously, Mac Jones kind of lost grasp of that job, but is Mitch Trubisky taking it from him? Is Mason Rudolph taking it from him?
No,
I don't know. And it's not like there's some other, there's
Mason Rudolph still there. That's crazy.
He's still on the depth chart, according to the good folks at RotoWire. So I assume so.
He looks great in camp. Remember those? Oh, sorry.
Oh boy.
Go ahead.
Don't even. Yeah, I don't remember that. I've cleaned that from my memory. Let's go to Cincinnati. To me, you mentioned Philly, and it's really hard to poke holes in that offense. I feel the same way about Cincinnati. To me, it's can they take advantage of, I wouldn't say a closing window, but a window that's going to be different after this season, because Joe Burrow counts for $11.5 million against the cap in 2023. That number jumps to $29.5 million next season. So
absolutely,
we've talked a lot about the extensions that are coming or maybe not coming for someone like T. Higgins. Obviously, they're going to lock up Jamar Chase. They bring back Joe Mixon. This could be his last year there as well. So I think for Cincinnati, that window is going to be open as long as Joe Burrow is there. But this is that final year where it feels like, okay, things might change going forward roster wise. Like this could be their best opportunity to win the Super Bowl this year, depending on what happens with those receivers.
Absolutely. Hard choices abound for the Bengals coming up here. And they already had to make some. Bates is gone. Both starting safeties are gone for that matter, in part because they are keeping their powder dry for Burrow, Chase, and probably Higgins, maybe Higgins. We'll see about that one. That's going to be a big storyline there. In fact, pay attention. Joe Mixon just took a big pay cut to restructure his contract. That is going to open things up. I think they get one extension done here before the season starts. I think that's one to be the hidden stories there, I think. And maybe not even hidden. It might be in plain sight. But yeah, and the other thing is Mixon's still got some legal issues perhaps to litigate there. The menacing charge. He's got a trial set in August. So something to watch there. See if there's a suspension forthcoming. They didn't go out and get a free agent running back. Cook and Elliott are still available. So that's still a possibility. But, we'll watch and see that one. So, yeah, you're right. Otherwise, though, and they improved their offensive line, too. They went out and got Orlando Brown. We'll see what happens with Jonah Williams. He asked for a trade. They said, no, you're not going to get traded. We got you at right tackle. So we'll see what happens.
This isn't the NBA, pal.
Yeah, exactly. No, it is most certainly not. They do least amount of power in pro sports, I feel like. Maybe hockey has less power, but for the players. But anyhow, let's move on to the next team.
Let's go to the Baltimore Ravens.
Yes.
Lamar Jackson in a new offense, bringing in Todd Monken. Does his running actually reduce? I'm skeptical. I don't think it does. We'll see how much they're willing to open up the passing game. I think this is pretty easily the best wide receiver room that Lamar has had since he's been in Baltimore. You got a healthy Rashad Bateman. You bring in Odell. You draft Zay Flowers. And even Duvernay and Aguilar as your 4-5, I think that's fine. If those guys are your 2-3, that's not ideal. But having those players as your depth pieces, I think is really, really strong. The running back room, they basically brought it back. They're running it back from 2022. J.K. Dobbins' health, I think, is going to be paramount when you're talking about that group. But one thing that I found kind of interesting as I combed through the Ravens is, Mark Andrews went into last year as very clearly the tight end too. And, by the end of the season, that was not really clear, right? And I think you have more talent at the wide receiver position, some other ascending tight ends behind him. Can he firmly reestablish himself as the second best tight end in football behind Travis Kelce? I think that's a real question.
I think you're right about that. I think that was without Lamar for such an extended period of time that I'm less concerned about him, but maybe the gap has narrowed. Like I think you could do a Hawk and Lock, put him as pretty close, a healthy Kittle. And we're going to get to their issues, the Niners issues, and how that affects Kittle too. But I think he's a little bit closer. And then there's some Kyle Pitts truthers still out there, which we will also discuss. I think these are all issues that we're going to have to pay close attention to. As a Bengals fan, I hated the Monken hiring because I'm a Bengals fan, and I think it's going to be great for Baltimore. I think it's not just going to be a good hire. I think it's going to be a great hire. I don't think Lamar's going to throw for 5,000 yards or whatever he's claiming this week, but at the same time, I think it's going to be very beneficial to this Baltimore's offense here.
All right, let's finish out the AFC North with the Cleveland Browns. This might be the most obvious question of all 32 teams here. It's Deshaun Watson. Can he prove that he's still a superstar, right? I think last year you could come up with a litany of excuses for why he didn't play well. We know what those are. We don't need to relitigate them. Those excuses are off the table this year, right?
Yep.
Nobody's going to be hearing any of that. He's coming in, starting week one. There's not this long waiting period. There's not this drawn out legal process. There's not, kind of worrying about his perception. Like, things like that tend to fade, right or wrong. We've seen it with plenty of other players who've run into legal trouble in the past. It seems like the biggest deal in the world at the time. 2-3 years later, if you play well, it all fades away. Deshaun Watson has an opportunity to be the next guy on that list. And I think we're going to know pretty quickly, right? I mean, it's easy to forget just how dominant this guy was. Top 5 quarterback in the NFL, no question, during that final year with the Houston Texans. All of that, kind of faded away last season. He looked like a completely different player. And, if that carries over, if he's struggling week 1, week 2 of this season, I mean, Cleveland is going to be in a really, really tough spot here. I mean, it's hard to overemphasize just how much of a shell of himself he looked like at the end of last season. I think in general, there seems to be optimism that he's going to get back to the player that he was, but it's a huge, huge question mark to me. And if he is, this is a Super Bowl contender. There's no question about that. I mean, they're still probably, to me, the second or third best team in their own division. But if Deshaun Watson's the 4th best quarterback in football, that completely changes the calculus.
Yep. Encouraging note, he ran in every single game.
Yep.
Minimum a floor of 20 rushing yards per game. And definitely, potential for a lot more. Only 1 rushing touchdown. Even as good fantasy passing games, the 3 touchdowns against the Commanders, the finale against the Steelers where he threw for 2 touchdowns. Even those had some gray linings, though. I mean, he only was 9 for 18 in that game against the Commanders with some comically bad throws that he was lucky didn't get picked off. I think one of the touchdowns was kind of one of those fluke touchdowns too. The Pittsburgh game, 2 picks. These are things to worry about a little bit there. And I think weather is something to kind of keep an eye out here for. Even when he was on the Texans, remember Cleveland has these horrific windy and icy games. Yep. It's the wind that's the real problem there too. There was a Texans-Browns game when he was still with the Texans that was like Stone Age is bad. And it was, this is when he was at his peak before all the allegations came out, all the charges, not just allegations at this point, everything came out. This is when he was, chip on his shoulder, wanting to leave the Texans, but playing hard guy. And he had a horrible game that game. So late season home games. Yep. Can you even succeed in Cleveland? It's something that I'd be concerned about a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And, last thing I'll say about the Browns is, again, I think we're going to know pretty quickly, which version of Watson we're getting. 4 of their first 5 games come against the Bengals, the Steelers, the Ravens, and the 49ers.
Wow. Front-loaded schedule there for sure.
Yep.
All right, let's go to the NFC North, very much a changing division, maybe a change in the guard division. We'll see about that. But let's start off with Chicago. Who starts a running back for this team? They have 3 now. They have Deonta Foreman, who they signed. They still have Khalil Herbert, and they drafted Johnson as well. So I ask you, Nick Whalen, which of these Chicago running backs do you want?
I want D'Onta Foreman, man. I really like D'Onta Foreman. I had him in a lot of leagues last year, in Carolina, and obviously that team context has changed. I wouldn't say he's in a better situation necessarily. He's going about 2-3 rounds later than Khalil Herbert. Herbert has always flashed when healthy. I think he passes the eye test for sure, especially when you're talking about, that lesser tier of running back. So I get the appeal there, but D'Onta Foreman, to me, whenever given the opportunity, I feel like he's kind of proven that he's a starting caliber NFL running back. And maybe he's not a top 15 back in the league, but there's 32 starters for a reason. And, this was a incredibly productive back at the college level, really unique body, to be able to move at that size, kind of a Derrick Henry light in some ways. So not ideal, having to compete with Herbert, having to compete with Roschon Johnson, who they added in the draft. They did add Travis Homer as well as a depth piece in that running back room. But Foreman is the guy for me at cost.
From July 1st on, they are Herbert's RB 36. Foreman is RB 46 or 37, 46, and 50 respectively for the 3 running backs. So all very affordable. Just a question of, but the problem is you don't want to, this is not a handcuff situation. This is a lottery ticket situation. You want to get one of them and hope it pops. You don't really want to have a stranglehold over the Bears backfield because it might actually be a timeshare, and that's the worst case scenario. But I will say if one emerges, you want that because mobile quarterbacks are the best thing for a running back. Maybe not at the goal line. I'll grant you that. But you find swaths of land to run through there when you have a mobile quarterback. So I think it's very important to pay attention to that. All right. I like the Bears generally, too, for their offense. I think they're going to take a big step forward. Detroit Lions. everybody's happy fun team. Everybody loves them again. No hard knocks this year, but
No.
I want to ask you, I'm going to be watching a little bit about two situations here. I'm splitting the baby. David Montgomery's mystery injury. And how much is that? We don't really know what that injury was yet. How severe it is. It could be a complete nothing burger. But him splitting carries with Jahmyr Gibbs is obviously a big issue. And I also want to see, how do they work in Jameson Williams after he comes back from his suspension?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Jameson Williams question is so interesting, right? Because he has one career catch, one career touchdown, right? And so it doesn't really feel like we have a read on him, but the scouting report coming out of Alabama was this guy's a home run hitter, and like literally the only sample that we have is a home run. So I feel like that even just that one game, that one catch, it's kind of propelled the same hype that the kind of you want the unknown as opposed to the known commodity, and it still feels like he's unknown. But we have the one very small sample of kind of a preview of what a lot of people thought he could be. Now, I have not really grabbed Jameson Williams. I think I had him at the end of like one best ball. The suspension to me really clouds things. But they obviously need him, right? I mean, this is not a super deep receiving core. I mean, they have Marvin Jones back, but beyond that, there's really nothing. I mean, Josh Reynolds, obviously you have Amon-Ra St. Brown as the number one. So he's coming back into a really good situation. I don't think he's going to have to like all of a sudden, earn his snaps or anything like that. But I just, when you can already cross a player off for X number of games, and then you have the possibility of injury on top of that, that really cools the optimism for me. And then, on Jahmyr Gibbs, like, love the player. I didn't really have as much of a problem with it as some people did as far as where they drafted him. I think especially once they rounded out the rest of their draft, it made a little more sense in hindsight. But he's gone as high as 20 in NFFC leagues. And I know last year was a really unique
overall, not RB 20, by the way.
Yes. Right, the overall pick, yes, and he's going closer to pick 40 in general, which I think makes sense. But taking a guy like that over a proven commodity like Aaron Jones, a proven commodity like Joe Mixon, he's going ahead of Kenneth Walker, he's going ahead of J.K. Dobbins. Like, I'm pumping the brakes a little bit on Jahmyr Gibbs. And look, if he explodes as a rookie, I guess I'll be behind the train on that one.
Yep. Let's move on to the Green Bay Packers. Nothing's happened here. We can move now. Okay. The Jordan Love era has begun. Mm-hmm. There's been some fuzzy, nice, warm things coming out of Packers camp being said about him. Are you buying?
I'm buying that he could be a fine quarterback. I will say I am not buying that. The one throw that everybody brings up with him was like I think he had like a crossing route to Christian Watson.
Yep.
That Watson then took like 40 yards on his own for a touchdown against the Eagles. Everybody's like, whoa, hey, Jordan Love. I'm like, I think 90% of quarterbacks in the league make that same throw. I'm willing to kind of hear out the Packers on this one, mostly given their track record of developing quarterbacks. I mean, you have to remember, Aaron Rodgers, when he sat behind Brett Favre and came in, it was not like he was instantly MVP Aaron Rodgers by any means. It was really his second year as a starter when he started to see that leap. So I think if we're judging Jordan Love on like, is he a star? Yes or no, right away, I think that's unfair. And I think we have to keep context in mind. But in general, I think this team has become underrated. I think they're the fourth best odds to win the NFC North. I still think they're a better team than Chicago. I think, we'll talk about Minnesota in a second. They were quite literally the luckiest team in NFL history last year. I think they take a step back. So, with Green Bay, I'm willing to hear out the optimism on Jordan Love. And as I mentioned a couple times, Aaron Jones is somebody I've been drafting a ton in best ball league so far. I think his ADP is significantly lower than it should be.
I've got some concern because Rodgers leaned on him in the red zone a lot, and I don't know if Jordan Love does the same.
I guess. I mean, where else does he go though, right? I mean, Christian Watson to me is kind of a home run hitter, as we talked about. And that can be a very good thing. It was a great thing last year, but I don't know that he's proven he could be a number one possession receiver. It's like Romeo Doubs is not somebody you're throwing a jump ball in the back of the end zone. They're very unproven at tight end. I think it's Luke Musgrave, the rookie, who's probably the favorite to start. AJ Dillon is like one of the worst short yardage backs in football, despite his stature.
Right. He's the new Ron Dane.
Hey, wait a second. All right.
Hey, now.
Uncalled for.
Shot across the bow.
In many ways, he is. That's actually not an unfair comparison whatsoever. But yeah, I mean, I think in theory, it's like, oh yeah, you're inside the 5-yard line. Give it to AJ Dillon. Yeah, they've tried that the last 2 years and it hasn't worked. So I get the pessimism on Aaron Jones, but I also think they get back to using him a little bit more as a receiver. I think he's one of my more underrated veterans in fantasy right now.
Minnesota Vikings. Alexander Mattison is now the starter. Is he the next really good feature back, or is he someone of a lesser nature? I made the Amos 0A comp.
Oh boy.
Yeah, but I know that's evil to do that. But no, it's probably not fair. But my point is, can he handle my question, I should say, not point, is can he handle a full-time load on a week-to-week basis? I know he's looked good in spots. I sometimes think these guys who are longtime backups do look good in spots, especially if they're coming in relief later in games, and they're coming kind of running into some good hitters counts here.
Right. No, you're right. I mean, it's the thing I've been saying about Madison all offseason is like, yeah, on a per game basis, it's like, yeah, of course he should be able to handle that. But we just haven't seen it. We haven't had to think about him in this context because it's so obviously been Dalvin Cook. And yes, it feels like Dalvin Cook is always banged up, but he's missed fewer games than you think over the last few years. So there's not like a huge sample of Alexander Madison, like, starting 6 games in a row. It's kind of been these spot starts here and there. I will say, where he's going right now, RB20 in NFFC leagues, you're getting him around pick 65. I think that's a totally fair price, right? I don't think there's been over optimism on Madison.
Yeah, I think so too. I see, RB20 is about my range. I think that's about where I go. As you alluded to, though, I think that the Vikings lived a gilded existence until about the last couple weeks of the regular season, and of course the playoff game. I mean, what happens if things turn sour and they're like playing from behind? Is he going to be that pass catcher? Are they going to be in another situation there? Because I think it's going to be a harder time for them all around this year.
Well, they were also 26th in yards per attempt, 27th in yards per game last season. So it's not like he's playing behind this fantastic running offense, right? I mean, they were a team that kind of relied a lot on Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson. I don't think that changes this year. So yes, he's in a much better situation just as a default RB1, but he's not walking into like the 49ers offensive line here.
Exactly right. All right, we're at the halfway point. Got to share a little bit of business with our listeners here. First, from our friends at Circa, get ready for more millions guaranteed. The biggest pro football contests in Vegas are back and bigger than ever with $14 million in guaranteed prizes only at Circa Sports. Enter in Nevada, play from anywhere. 2 ways to win and no rake. Play Circa Million, make 5 picks against the spread each week with 100% payback to players. Grand finale winner takes home $1 million. Last place takes home a $100,000 booby prize. With quarterly and full season payouts, $6 million is guaranteed. Join Circa Survivor to select one team each week straight up with no repeat selections. If the team loses or ties, the entry is eliminated. Each team can only be picked once in a season, so do some mapping out before the season starts. Go 20-0 or be the last person standing to win it all. $8 million is guaranteed. $14 million in guaranteed prizes overall. Visit circasports.com for details. We just came back from the Circa Sportsbook and Casino and had a great time there for our annual RotoWire conference. Nick and I will be broadcasting the weekend of August 24th and 25th live from Circa to help promote those contests. We're excited about that. Also, speaking of broadcasts, we also did some broadcasts from the Blue Wire, beautiful Blue Wire studios at the Wynn. We are proud members of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. So thus, we're going to play their ads right now. All right. Thank you for your indulgence with that. Nick, what division are we hitting next?
We're heading to the AFC West, Jeff, and we are going to start with the reigning Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs.
All right.
To me, for a team that's this good and feels like could win the Super Bowl every year for the next 10 years, it's a little strange to me that they have a pretty glaring question. And that to me is, can they get away with this wide receiver by committee approach, right? There is no true number one receiver or really anything close to that on this roster right now. We thought maybe they would be the D'Andre Hopkins team. They were never really felt like all that serious of a contender for Hopkins. Obviously he's now in Tennessee, and there's not really anybody else out there who would make sense to bring in. So, the top KC receiver off the board right now in NFFC drafts is Kadarius Toney at wide receiver 35. I mean, that is wild. You have the best quarterback in the game, arguably the best quarterback ever, and your best receiver is the 35th receiver in fantasy. So it's somewhat of like a post Moss, Brady Patriots approach, where you kind of trust the continuity, you trust the quarterback to raise the level of all the wide receivers. And of course, what I haven't mentioned here is they have one of the best tight ends ever in Travis Kelce. So you could get away with that, when your tight end is as dynamic as Kelce, but still a little bit strange to, see a team that has a quarterback like Mahomes, not really go all in on surrounding him with the best possible talent at receiver.
It's amazing. Not only that, but they don't have like a best possible talent at running back either. I mean, usually you have you got this elite Corvette of an offense, and you got the running back, you got 2 receivers and a tight end that we're all scrambling to draft, trying to build stacks to involve. No, it's Mahomes and Kelsey, and then you're just like, okay, 8-ball, let's go here. I mean, let's go. All signs point to Rashee Rice this week. 37 wide receiver, 67. He's their number 3 receiver, 67. It's crazy.
It's crazy, man. It really is. And I think if nothing else, it just speaks to how insane Kelsey is, right? I mean, that it just seems it doesn't matter. It's like, all right, well, Mahomes and Kelsey try to stop it. Nobody's been able to do it for the last 5 years. And, Kelsey's getting up there in age. He's somebody who is, had a long college career, was injured early on, didn't really become, capital T, capital K, Travis Kelsey until much later than some star tight ends. So I think he's older than you realize. He hasn't really been in our lives as a superstar all that long. And, at some point you think that fall off is coming, but I mean, there were no signs last season that he's anywhere close to that cliff.
Exactly. So, we'll see. I want to watch Tony. I want to see Rice, see if they emerge. I guess Sky Moore, but he's the least interesting to me of the 3 of those wide receivers. But let's move on. Who do we got next?
We have the Denver Broncos. I mean, we could probably do 20 minutes on questions for the Denver Broncos.
That's right.
Yes. We talked to Javonte Williams. I don't know what else there is to say here. I mean, it's just a massive question mark, right? And if he's not ready or he's not 100%, it's Samaje Perine time. And there's not a whole lot behind that. Do they add more depth? Do they add Dalvin Cook? I think if they add Cook, that means that they're maybe not that confident in Javonte Williams. If they hold off, then I think we have to take that as a positive indication as far as where Williams is at health-wise. But if Javonte can't get healthy and they don't add anybody else, I mean, they might need to recapture that like mid-2000s, like Mike Anderson, Olandis Gary magic, where they could just seemingly turn anybody into a productive running back. So big-time questions there. This feels like a big prove-it year for Jerry Jeudy, right? And, I think he has – there are kind of 2 paths here where it's like, all right, if Russell Wilson gets things turned around, if Sean Payton can kind of get that moving in the right direction, it would not shock anybody if Jerry Jeudy was like a top 15 receiver, probably toward the latter end of that, given how much talent is at the top. Or I think he could kind of go down like the Juju Smith-Schuster path, right? Where it's like he's a bigger name than he is actual production-wise. And this feels like the year that we're going to get that answer.
Agreed. It's a prove-it year for Russell Wilson. It's a prove-it year for Cortland Sutton. It's prove it all around. I know you took Sutton in an FSWA draft, FSGA. I forget which of the 2 organizations.
As FSGA conference draft.
Yeah, that's right. And I kind of like Tim Patrick as a late flyer for that matter too. Sean Payton is a wild card here. What can he do to kind of resuscitate everybody's value here? I think it is a kind of a wipe the slate clean sort of year. Now, granted, they don't have a whole lot of cap room. Their line might be a problem. They had massive offensive line issues too last year. I don't think people realize how bad the injuries were there. So that might be a little lining for optimism if they're healthy this year. All right, what do we got next in the AFC West?
The one thing I'll mention quickly on Denver, by the way, is I think Russell Wilson was such an obvious one that I didn't even really write it down, but he's not winning. He's not winning any sort of power struggle with Sean Payton, right? Like if they win 6 games this year, it's on Russell Wilson. There's not going to be anybody saying, "Oh man, this is Sean Payton's fault." So I think we need to be clear about that. Russell Wilson had 1 year where he could blame the coaching staff, and he already burned that one. So it's all on him this year.
He's used that card.
Exactly. All right, let's go to the Chargers. I think this is the team that I have the most notes on, so I'll try to run through some of these as quickly as I can.
We might go 2.5 minutes here.
Yeah, right. 2:01 here. Play calling under Kellen Moore. How much does it change? I think there is room for huge touchdown progression for Justin Herbert this season. I think last year, I mean, this is a team that was like top 3 in basically all the volume stats, and the per completion stats, the touchdown stats were way down. I think all that probably rises almost by default this season. I mean, that was like kind of the low bar, I feel like, for Justin Herbert going forward. They were 28th in yards per completion last season, and yet they were 11th in passing EPA. Extremely high volume, extremely low results. They were not that different than like what Tampa was doing as an offense. Like if you look at Brady and Herbert last season, they were a little more similar than probably Herbert would like to admit. The Chargers were a well below average red zone team last season. Dallas was by far the best red zone team in terms of conversion rate, touchdown rate in the NFL last year. We'll see how much of that translates coming over with Kellen Moore. As I mentioned, I think a lot of passing touchdown progression for Justin Herbert. And now, you have Quentin Johnston, a guy who early in the draft process was considered a potential top 10 pick. They end up getting him later in round 1. To me, really high upside insurance policy for Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, who have kind of become like the Kawhi and Paul George of the NFL, where it's like, if they're healthy and engaged, they're arguably the best receiver duo in the league, but it just feels like that's not really even a possibility at this point.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like communism has never really worked because it's never been done properly. Okay, well, that's fine, but it's not going to be done properly. Deep cut there. But let's look at a little bit at. I want to kind of dig into Allen and Williams a little bit more because I'm fading Keenan Allen at ADP.
Yeah.
He's wide receiver 17, which is a downgrade from where he was before, but still puts you smack dab in the beginning of the fourth round, late third, early fourth, at least in the NFFC, which is full point PPR. I'd rather take Amari Cooper. I'd rather take Jerry Jeudy. I'd rather take Calvin Ridley. At least three, and I think you could make a case for Drake London, DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin too. I just don't see the touchdown upside. I know he had some productive games after he came back, but the risk just seems so high for me.
Look, for me, it's just about injuries. Like, I actually think there is a lot of touchdown upside, and he's somebody that I'm almost scared not to draft because it's like, all right, if the injuries reverse, I mean, he played 16 games 2 years ago. He played 10 last year. And I mean, honestly, it felt like he was only healthy for like 4 of those.
Mm-hmm.
I think he could still be really productive. I think he has one more really good season in him. But it's just, if you're taking him inside the top 30 and he plays 12 games, you're just going to get burned really badly. So I'm with you. I'd take Cooper over him. Jeudy versus Allen to me is more of a debate. I think like Calvin Ridley versus Keenan Allen is really interesting as well. But I will acknowledge there's a ton of upside here. It's just, at age 31, a guy who just seems like he's perpetually banged up. It's always a hamstring or something every single week. Right. I dealt with that too much last year, and I want that off my plate. One last note on the Chargers. Can they get anything out of the tight end position? They've just been a very average to below average team in terms of tight end production. We love Herbert. We love how much they're slinging the ball around. They have not had a tight end finish inside the top 12 at the position since Antonio Gates in 2016. It's just been a lot of like 20 to 25 overall for Gerald Everett. Maybe he's just not that guy talent-wise, but if there is all this touchdown upside, yardage upside, like I'm saying there is for Justin Herbert, how much of that can trickle down to the tight end?
In a league where, on a team where Austin Eckler exists and is going to just take all the red zone work, I say no. I don't. Everett was fine as a fill-in last year at times, but I don't think there's much beyond that. I think he is replacement value. Let's move on. We squeeze, we're going to expand. We expanded the Chargers so we can squeeze the Raiders. Such a disaster. Let's talk about the Raiders now.
Oh, man. Yeah, we already talked about Josh Jacobs and what's going on there. I don't think there's a lot left to say there. This to me feels like a team that's destined for like a midseason blow up, right? And they kind of had that last season, and I don't think they really did anything to eradicate those concerns. The question that I had written down is Davante Adams a Raider at the end of the season, right? Like, couldn't you see this team starting like 1-5? Davante wants out. They're almost forced into a corner where they kind of have to do right by the player, and then he's traded at the deadline. Like, I don't think that's that crazy. I'd have to look into some of the money stuff and all that. But Davante Adams, I don't think wants to be a Raider. This is not the Raiders team that he signed up for. He specifically wanted to play with Derek Carr. Derek Carr, as you may know, Jeff, is now with the New Orleans Saints. So I just think this is a team that is cruising toward a cliff that's almost unavoidable at this point. First 6 games for the Raiders: Denver, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, the Chargers, the Packers, and the Patriots. So it's not an overly loaded schedule. Obviously, you don't feel great about the Buffalo game. Can they emerge from that stretch 3-3 to begin the year? I don't think they can. I don't know. But if they can't beat Denver week 1, if they can't beat at least one of Pittsburgh, Green Bay, New England, these are winnable games early on that if they don't win, I think is really going to push this team toward an uncomfortable position.
Bottom 5 home field advantage in football too. We saw last year, they started getting to the point where people are complaining about selling tickets to Niners fans, and it was at least half Niners fans. Now, granted, the season was over. They had benched Carr at that point in time, but point remains, it's not a native town. It's not like those rabid fan base. They host the Steelers, a team that travels really well. I mean, come on, the Chiefs are just going to flood that place. You just know this is going to happen. So, going to be interesting to see what happens there with them. But I think that, I think this falls in the predictable disaster zone. On VEASAN, I talked about putting them as an under on their season total win total bet. Let's move on to the NFC West, which everyone thought was going to be the killer division last year. Fate had a funny way of intervening. I hope it doesn't do the same in the AFC North this year. But let's start with Arizona. When does Kyler return? I know there was a report saying Kyler wants to be back by week 1 from his knee injury, but the reporter in question even said that's going to be a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, that's the biggest question easily for this team. I would also say it doesn't matter when Kyler Murray returns, right? I mean, certainly it matters for fantasy. I don't know that their trajectory really changes. I mean, it says a lot that the win total right now is 4.5 over at the DraftKings Sportsbook. I think that would certainly imply that Kyler Murray maybe is not back for week 1. If he is, that's great for Marquise Brown. To a lesser degree, that's great for guys like Rondale Moore and Greg Dortch, who are okay in deeper leagues last year. It's just, again, I don't know that it matters. This feels like kind of a gap year for Arizona. They do have the Texans pick next year. So you kind of have that in your back pocket. There's not necessarily that impetus to tank per se, especially when the number one prospect is a quarterback and you kind of already have a quarterback in Kyler Murray. But it's a strange place to be for Arizona because, it feels like they're in a rebuild except for quarterback, right?
Yeah.
There are not many teams that go into that position where everything on the roster needs improvement except for your quarterback. And, the questions with Kyler Murray to me are more about commitment, off-field stuff than his actual talent or his fit with his team.
Right. I don't know if he's going to be able to run. And no D-Hop now. They didn't add any significant talent to the roster. If you look at what they did, I mean, they did draft a receiver in the 3rd round and the kid out of Stanford. I guess that qualifies. But this was the team that was shedding, not adding. They did add a good offensive lineman in the draft. That is a positive. I'll grant you that. But we're talking about a team that just let D-Hop go for nothing because they couldn't work out any sort of trade at all. They have the same running backs as they had last year. Hollywood Brown, Rondale Moore. We're going undersized to start off. I'm underwhelmed.
Yeah, big time. For the most part, I've been staying away from James Conner as well. It just feels like kind of like a poisonous offense that I don't really want a piece of. And, he's the entrenched starter. So at some point, obviously he's going to have some value, but it's not somebody I'm excited to take. It's somebody I will take when I'm trying to build depth, but I'm not going into a draft like psyched that I got James Conner at pick 75.
Right. Let's move on to the Rams. I am going to be watching the health of both Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford here. Kupp missed OTAs, but he said he's fully healthy. It's just because he was on paternity leave. But we'll see. He's working his way back from a horrific ankle injury. And then of course, Matthew Stafford working his way back from the neck injury.
Yeah, those two are tied at the hip, right? I think if Cooper Kupp is healthy and Matthew Stafford isn't, I think we kind of see parts of what happened last season. If Stafford's healthy and Kupp isn't, then I think you kind of have the same net result. Cooper Kupp, if healthy, to me is somebody who could almost be a league winner. I think you just remember back 2 years ago just how unbelievable that season was. At the same time, like, does this team still have I wouldn't even say Super Bowl? Like, do they have like NFC divisional round upside even if those guys stay healthy? I think you're relying so heavily on that combination. To me, I'm almost more worried about Stafford. It's like, even if he is healthy, is he still the same guy that he was a couple of years ago? Cam Akers, who felt like he was on the verge of just being off this team, really was on the verge last year. All of a sudden, he's back entrenched as a starting running back. There's just not a whole lot to get excited about on the rest of this roster. You lose Jalen Ramsey. Aaron Donald is 32 years old at this point. Another team that I wouldn't put him in the Arizona category because there's a lot more upside and still a lot more talent on this team, but they're very top heavy, and that's how this team has been built the last few years. But they've kind of shed some of those elite pieces. Like, they're top heavy, but it feels like they only have like 3 blue chippers left.
Yeah, Jalen Ramsey's gone. They're trying to shed salary, but they're precious little depth. Remember, they've pawned away a bunch of their draft picks. So you're looking at, if something happens to Stafford, Brett Rippon is your backup, unless it's Stetson Bennett. At Kupp, it's like Van Jefferson, Ben Skoranek. We saw him last year. DeMarcus Robinson, Tutu Atwell. Yeah. Puka Nakua, who we saw getting drafted in the RotoWire Vegas League. Interesting. He had a good OTAs, fast learner.
Yeah.
5th round pick out of BYU. This sounds like a lot of noise. You can see why people are taking Higbee and thinking he might get wide receiver 2 reps, but I don't know. I'm probably not that optimistic. Let's move on to a team which does have huge aspirations. That's the Niners, but they don't know who their quarterback's going to be. They have, 51-man roster. It's awesome. Yeah. But then you're debating between a guy who is the Mr. Irrelevant and Brock Purdy, who did well, but he's coming back from a massive injury. And now we'll have like scouting reports on him, Trey Lance and Sam Darnold. I mean, I'm still blown away that Trey Lance is considered a bust in this league, and he's barely ever played.
He's barely ever played, and it feels like he might not even play that much this season, right? I mean, I have no idea where this is headed. And, the funny thing is, like, everybody's still saying all these great things about Sam Darnold. We've seen that, right? I mean, he's a capable fill-in. I think he's kind of just heading down like the mid-career Andy Dalton path, where it's like, if you need somebody to hold you over for 4 games, he could probably get you to 2-2, but not somebody I'd be excited about starting for a full season, especially if I want to win the Super Bowl. So to me, it feels like Brock Purdy if healthy, is going to get that first crack. But I think he too still has a lot to prove, right? I think there's a big difference between coming into, I wouldn't say a no pressure situation, because obviously that was a team that when he took over still wanted to continue on the path that they were going, and maybe would have had he stayed healthy. But now he's coming in year 2. He's not just some random 7th rounder who feels like a good story. There are real expectations on his shoulders. So I mean, kind of insane to me, like you said, that this team is considered probably the second Super Bowl favorite in its conference, and we truly have no idea who's going to be the quarterback. Not only week 1, but you could tell me any of those guys are starting like week 9.
Yeah, exactly. And it's mind blowing because it's such a good roster. Otherwise, that I think that you're looking at a really good situation to step into. But like George Kittle, I mean, he did so much better under Purdy than he did under any other quarterbacks there. I mean, that's like massive. I mean, he took off once Purdy took over, and that's something there where like I'm going to be watching that one closely. I mean, it really, his status, he could be tight end too. You're talking about Mark Andrews earlier. I mean, it could be Kittle. I mean, he's got the talent, obviously. It's just, do he has the reps? Is he asked to block? These are things that are really concerned about there. And, big linchpin decision here.
Yeah. I would throw as some more minor points, Deebo Samuel, can he kind of recapture the same optimism that we had going into this past season? He's going off as wide receiver 16 right now. Obviously he was banged up at times last season. They were a little more careful, it felt like, with the workload. Adding Christian McCaffrey reduces some of those gadgety packages they like to use him in. But I think the emergence of Brandon Ayuk has also taken some of the pressure off of him, right? I mean, Deebo Samuel regressed last season. Brandon Ayuk continues to get better. He's going into year 4 now, coming off of 1,000-yard, 8-touchdown season with some quarterback issues mixed into there. So maybe there's kind of a meeting point there where Deebo stays a little bit healthier, but does that offset the ascent of Brandon Ayuk, who I think has become one of the more underrated receivers in the league?
Yeah, that's right. All right, one more team in the NFC West, and we'll take care of a little business. The Seattle Seahawks. They kind of galaxy brained us here. They drafted for the second year in a row. They've drafted a running back in the second round. Kenneth Walker, who was good last year, is nominally the starter, but Zach Charbonnet out of UCLA, is he that much of a talent that they had to spend a second round pick on him when they have other issues they needed to address?
Yeah, it was an interesting pick, right? And they kind of went with a luxury pick in Smith and Jigba to add to the Metcalf Lockett combination, and obviously Lockett's getting up there, so it makes sense as a kind of a succession plan. But a team like this that has needs, going with a receiver and a running back with the first 2 picks, to me, one, speaks to how well they drafted defensively last year, right? I mean, they really restocked a defense that badly needed an infusion of talent, and all of a sudden that looks like one of the better units in the NFC. The Walker Charbonnet thing is going to be really interesting to track, right? I think there was a lot of people like Charbonnet, but then when he went to Seattle on draft night, Twitter is just like, oh, come on, man, are you serious? Like, we love Kenneth Walker too. Now we have to choose between these 2 guys,
right?
So I think that ends up being like a net frustration more than anything else. I don't think one of those guys runs away with a job, of course, unless there's an injury. I think it ends up being a situation where we look back and say, like, I just wish that Charbonnet had landed somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. I took Charbonnet in the Vegas draft when I did the hero running back, did one running back early and then waited till like the 7th round and took a whole string of them. I think Charbonnet is going to get his time. I will say, I think Seattle wants to run the ball a ton. I think this is nothing new. We know this about, Pete Carroll, that this is what the type of offense he envisions, but Walker kind of wore down, remember, last year, and they, to the point where he wasn't practicing every week so they could be fresh for games. And the drop off from Walker to the next back was pretty huge. So I think that he had that in mind a little bit. Now the question is it going to be a Walker week and then a Charbonnet week? Are they going to timeshare? I'm curious to see how it works out.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right about that. And what we do need to keep in mind is they needed running back depth, right? So it certainly is frustrating for Charbonnet to land there, but it's like, teams aren't just going forward with one featured back anymore. It's not 2004.
That's true.
So it kind of made sense to me on paper where he ended up. Schedule wise, pretty favorable start for Seattle. They get the Rams in week 1. They're at Detroit week 2, which I think is a really fun game. But then it's the Panthers, the Giants, the Bengals, and the Cardinals. So I think you have like 4 really winnable games in that first 6.
Yeah, for sure. It could be a lot of fun. Hopefully it's a ticket to the carnival against Detroit like it was last year. That was certainly fun. All right. We got 2 more divisions left, but before we do that, a little bit more business to take care of. First, from our friends at Reality Sports Online. By now, most of you have probably heard of Reality Sports Online, the powerful fantasy sports platform where owners get to build and manage their fantasy team like an NFL general manager. But the question is, have you tried it? It's time to go see what all the buzz in the Dynasty community is about. Free agency, multi-year contracts, a rookie draft, multi-team trades, franchise tags, contract extensions, first-round rookie options, automated contract and salary cap functionality, and much, much more. Think it sounds complicated? It's not. It's the best thing about Reality Sports Online Fantasy Front Office is that it doesn't take any more time than a standard league. It just requires more strategy. Do you think you're among the fantasy elite? Well, this is the platform to test your mettle. Still not sure? You can test out your general manager skills for free in a mock free agency auction. If you like what you see, use the promo code RotoWire to receive a 10% discount on your team or league today. Fantasy just got real at realitysportsonline.com. We are also sponsored by our good friends at Fantrax. For you fantasy football players out there, is there something you wish your fantasy league had or features that are missing from your current leagues? Bonus scoring, custom schedules or playoffs, deeper team settings? Well, look no further because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league, invite your friends, and dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top fantasy football platform in the industry. Coming from another service? Not a problem. Fantrax can easily import any of your current leagues and rosters and customize if needed. Ever have a trade go wrong or make a mistake in dropping a player? Fantrax commissioner tools allow you to undo any move with one simple click. Is there anything lacking in your current fantasy league manager? Fantrax likely has it. Fantrax is running a special promotion you don't want to miss. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/rotowire today to enter for your chance to win tickets for any regular season NFL game for you and your entire league, plus $6,000 in spending cash. That's right, tickets for your entire league. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing leagues for more chances to win. Simply go to fantrax.com/rotowire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. All right. Thank you for your indulgence on those. Let's move on. We got one more division left here, Nick. What do we got from the AFC South?
Coincidentally, we have saved America's division for last, and
right.
We will dig in on the Indianapolis Colts first. How long until Anthony Richardson starts? Is it week 1? Is it week 2? Is it week 4? Is it week 8? That matters, right? Because a lot of people are drafting Anthony Richardson like he's going to start week 1. I think that is a distinct possibility, but every week matters in that scenario, right? I mean, if they try to ride Gardner Minshew, ease him into action, and Anthony Richardson starts 12 games versus 17 games, that is a huge difference for the bottom line. So to me, that's the obvious number one. When you take a quarterback that high in the draft, especially this specific quarterback who feels like a boom bust, it's hard to start anywhere else. But this is a team that has a lot of questions, right? Jonathan Taylor being drafted as if he's going to have a bounce back year. I tend to be in that camp, but I think that's also tethered to the offensive line taking a big step forward. It felt like this is a line that was coasting on reputation for the last couple of years. And then like midway through last season, everybody's like, wait, I think this offensive line is actually really bad now. And, they kind of need to get back to where they were 2-3 years ago. You look at the wide receiver core and, Michael Pittman carried a ton of upside into last year, was one of the biggest quarterback victims, I think, in all of football last year. That could still be the case this season. And he's now being drafted as such. We'll see what they have in Alec Pierce, another guy it felt like we didn't really get a fair evaluation of last season. After that, it's just kind of a lot of bit guys, Josh Downs, Isaiah McKenzie, Ashton Doolin, not players you're really all that concerned about for fantasy purposes. And then the other player that I wanted to highlight is Jelani Woods, who I thought looked really good in spurts last year. He had that big game against Pittsburgh. Had a multi-touchdown game early. I think it was the upset against Kansas City, week 2 or week 3. I thought he showed some flashes last year, not enough where you're like, planning your draft around Jelani Woods, but somebody I have some interest in, late as a tight end too.
I mean, yeah. And just this team, it's not going to be a clown show this year. I mean, I don't think we can emphasize this enough. I mean, what a disgrace of a team it was last year. Jim Irsay says we have to start Sam Mellinger. Okay, let's start Sam Mellinger. Okay, now we're going to bring in this guy that's only coached high school before, and Jeff Saturday. All-time Colts great, but not a head coach, and not knowing some of like the timeout rules and things like that at the end of games. Sure, they played hard for a little bit, but I mean, it was kind of a joke of an organization last year, and just having a normal year. I mean, you expect that out of Commanders. You expect that out of Daniel Snyder. You don't expect. I guess you should have. I guess Jim Irsay is cut out of that cloth, I suppose, too. But it'll be a normal year, I think. We'll see.
It'll be a more normal year, right?
Yeah.
I don't think you could top the chaos that was the Saturday hiring. And people forget they did beat the Raiders that first game, which was like one of the worst losses of all time, I thought, by Las Vegas. But
then we saw Vegas play the rest of the season out too. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Right. Well, yeah, I think that should have been like the number one alarm on the Vegas Raiders season. But no, you're right. You're right overall. And I will say, if Irsay continues to exert his influence, my guess is that he'll want to see Richardson sooner than later.
Exactly right.
All right, let's go to Houston. Yeah. I'm saving the Jags for last. We'll go to Houston.
Of course.
It's all about CJ Stroud, right? I think he's been talked about, I think, the least of all the first round quarterbacks. But I think he's walking into a pretty clear and obvious situation. They're in a longer term rebuild, so I don't think there's extreme pressure on him to be great right away. But you also want to see it in year one. There's not a lot of quarterbacks who come out, really struggle in year one, and then turn into an elite player after that. So I think we need to see flashes out of CJ Stroud. Dameon Pierce was in an interesting situation, felt like a nice hit last season, but technically for a difficult team to evaluate. Can he kind of sustain that in year two? And then I think when you look at the wide receiver core, do you have any real interest there? Outside of Nico Collins, who is somebody that a fun player to draft in like the middle, late rounds. But after that, it's Robert Woods. It's John Mechie, who's a great college player. Obviously, had was it lymphoma or leukemia, something like that. So he's coming back from something serious. And beyond that, you just got like bad and creative players and Dalton Schultz. So I think in some ways, you look at this roster, it's not super talented. CJ Stroud's not walking into like a perfect situation, but I do think developmentally, this team should kind of progress with him, right? He's not going to be asked to do a ton right away.
Yeah, I think it's a similar situation to Carolina where, you got your elite QB draft prospect, but you need to build around him. And I'm staying away from Schultz at the price. I think it's going to be a big drop off. I am in on Nico Collins. I think Nico is pretty suave. I'm going to go that route. Sorry. I'm not sorry. I'll do it again. Don't worry. But I just recently moved up Collins and my rankings. And the other thing is, even with Cooks there, he was productive last year. Now Cooks is gone. Collins is the guy. They clicked well at OTAs and minicamp. I do think Collins has just got to stay healthy, but I think there's reason for hope for him.
Yeah, I think he's somebody where you kind of buy the talent, right? And you say, okay, I think he's talented enough, and I think he's clearly the number one guy in the offense, and you kind of trust him to figure it out from there. Let's go to Tennessee. The D'Andre Hopkins, Tennessee Titans. For me, when do the Will Levis calls start coming, right? I don't think he's a guy like Richardson or like Stroud, who you're talking about starting week one. But if this team gets off to any sort of sluggish start, that's going to happen. We see it every time there's a situation like this. Kind of feels like Tannehill's on his way out already. Can he make it through this season as a starting quarterback? I think that is a big time question for Tennessee. And then the other thing, as I alluded to at the top of the show, are we being overly aggressive in predicting a Derrick Henry downfall that has not come yet, right? I mean, he was the number one back in standard leagues, number 4 in PPR last year on a per game basis, number 3, number 4 in total value. So that fall off has not happened yet. It's almost like he's being drafted as if he had a down year last season. I don't really feel like that was the case. If Ryan Tannehill remains the starter, it's kind of status quo. If it's Will Levis, maybe there's a bit more downside, but I guess I feel like I'm in the minority here. Like I'm willing to jump ADP for Derrick Henry. And look, if this is the year that everything falls off a cliff, either he slows down or he gets hurt, I'll have to live with that. But I just think he's become a really good value, right? Everybody's like, he's being drafted like he's 32 years old.
Yeah. So injuries have happened more, I think. Yeah. Isn't that part of it? I mean, in 2021, he missed half the season. Last year, he averaged, before the foot injury, he was averaging over 5 yards a carry. It was 4.4 last year, 4.3 after the foot injury. Even less after the foot injury. The cumulative 2021 is 4.3. So I think there is a little bit of a backslide there, at least in health. And I think this is going to be a disaster in terms of the offensive line's not that great. I think Tannehill is going to be pretty bad. By the way, I think I wanted Hopkins to sign anywhere but Tennessee. I think this really limits Hopkins, but it also delays Tannehill getting replaced too. Right. Because I think they would have, like, without D-Hop there, I think they snap call to Levis whenever, when the milk goes bad. Now, I think they try to drag it out a little bit longer.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, it's a really frustrating landing spot for fantasy, that's for sure. I mean, it makes
Yeah.
them a better team, I guess, but it also says a lot that like the win total didn't change. The futures odds barely moved when that news broke over the weekend. So I don't think there's a belief that all of a sudden that really changes their trajectory. And the last thing I'll say on Henry is, we could quibble about the yards per carry. I get that. It's kind of he's basically down a full yard per carry from where he was in that 2020 season when he topped 2,000 yards, but I just think the volume is still going to be there, right? Like, I don't know that Hopkins alone makes this team like a productive passing offense. Like, even if he's only getting you 4.2 yards per carry, I think he's going to carry it enough that he's still going to be a workhorse in fantasy. Like, I guess I kind of view him more like I do, like Adrian Peterson, right? Where it's like he's just kind of in his own lane when it comes to like the type of physical specimen that he is. And there are other running backs, coming off of a foot injury 2 years ago that I'd be more concerned about. But it's like Derrick Henry just doesn't operate by normal human physical standards.
I think everybody breaks sometime. And Earl Campbell fizzled out pretty early in his career, and I can't help but make that comp.
Fair.
And D Hop, by the way, I think also has a little Andre Johnson in him too. I'm a little worried about the drop off there too. And I think it's pretty telling that contenders weren't falling all over themselves to get him. That Arizona couldn't get a trade done at all, like not even for like a 6th or 7th round pick. Right. So I think that's all pretty telling there. All right, how about America's team, Jacksonville Jaguars? What do we got for them?
I have just a long list of notes here, but I think for me, the number one question is, was it, or I shouldn't say was it a mistake, how big of a mistake will it be to essentially ignore what I thought were glaring holes in the defensive backfield and on the offensive line? I think this team, they made marginal improvements. They did take an offensive lineman with their first pick, but he's considered, one of the more raw prospects, a guy who's really physically impressive, still has some technique that he needs to learn. Can they actually, take the step forward that they want to take, which is not winning this division? Like, it's a disaster if they don't win the AFC South, and that's just because of the quality of the other 3 teams. But did they really improve their chances of beating Buffalo, beating Cincinnati, beating Kansas City? Running it back with essentially the same skill position group plus Calvin Ridley, that's fine with me. I think they did a great job with some what seemed like questionable free agency signings last year. Christian Kirk hit, Evan Ingram, who they just signed to an extension yesterday, that looks like a hit. So I have no issues with that. I don't think they needed to like go out and be a DeAndre Hopkins team or anything like that. But I think infrastructure wise, there's still some major questions. Defensively, they don't really have any stars. You have a lot of like good players, but can anybody from that group, if it's a Aluakon, if it's Tyson Campbell, if it's Trayvon Walker, Josh Allen, can any of those guys become like a true top 10 player at their position? Because right now they just have an okay defense. And, ultimately, again, that's probably enough to win you the AFC South, but is it enough to propel you into that next level in what's going to be just a ridiculously competitive AFC East or AFC conference, excuse me? I'm not sure that it is. So I think this is going to be a fun season. It's the first time in like my life, basically, that the Jags are going into a year with high expectations. But to me, it feels like their ceiling is kind of similar to where it was last year.
Yeah, you alluded to it. The offensive line is always what I think is the hidden underbelly, not even hidden, but it's such a, foundational piece, and it can be overlooked so many times. Cameron Robinson might be suspended. They lost Juwan Taylor. I think that's a loss. I think that's a pretty bad loss.
That's a loss.
I don't know if they adequately replace that there. You might have a rookie starting at left tackle right away. And we'll see that in the NFL. That often is tricky to handle unless he happens to be an elite one. We'll see about that.
It's one of those things where if you could just turn injuries off, like I used to do on Madden 2004, then everything's fine, I think. But it's like they're so shallow at a lot of key positions, right? And those injuries are going to come. It's the NFL. That happens every single year to every single team. So I don't know that they've adequately prepared for some of those contingencies. And then, of course, with Ridley, we have to mention that the guy has not played since week 7 of 2021. And, I think a lot of the early indications have been positive, but it's not just a given that after taking more than a year and a half off, he's just the same guy.
I think he's a worthy gamble. And I think at the price, I'm ready to go for that there. Mm-hmm. Let's go to the NFC, but South, and go maybe if it's not the AFC South, the NFC South. I think the NFC South is worse than the AFC South as a collective whole this year. So we'll start off with the Atlanta Falcons. Any Kyle Pitts truthers out there after a disastrous season last year? And not all on Pitts, but maybe a little bit on Pitts, but also coming back from a major injury. He was limited in workouts this offseason. They added Bijan Robinson. They're quadrupling down on their run first mentality. what can we possibly expect out of Kyle Pitts? Is it worth a premium draft spot?
Well, you might not have to take him with a premium draft spot, which is the nice thing, right? It's like you're at least you're not feeling like you're reaching and kind of breaking the bank for Kyle Pitts like you were last season. Average pick of 71 right now in NFFC drafts. That's still tight end 5. I mean, he's basically dead even with Dallas Goedert for the tight end 5, tight end 6 battle. But going, markedly, well over, basically 2 rounds, a round and a half, I should say, behind George Kittle, well behind Hawkinson, obviously Andrews and Kelsey. So the nice thing is, if you're a believer, you don't necessarily have to stake your entire team on Kyle Pitts. But that also speaks to, I think, just how quickly tight end depth or reliable tight ends dry up outside of that top 4. To me, we mentioned Atlanta, in context with Washington. It's all about how much you trust Ritter, right? I mean, if you think Desmond Ritter could be a decent quarterback, then by all means buy in on Kyle Pitts. By all means buy in on Drake London. But if we saw a very limited sample, we have not seen Ritter and Pitts together yet, which is a huge question mark for me. So it all comes down to the quarterback, right? Maybe that's oversimplifying it, but it really does when it comes to Atlanta. And I mean, they have a super fun group of skill position players, right? I mean, Robinson, London, Pitts is like a dream scenario when you're talking about guys who are, first, second, third year skill position players. But it doesn't matter if your quarterback is the 28th best at his position.
Exactly. Over under wins in Vegas on the Falcons is at 8.5.
Part of that is the division, right?
Yeah.
You feel like at worst you're like splitting with the rest of those teams, but I think I would lean under. I'd lean under.
We had a robust debate on the Falcons at the LA version of the RotoWire Steak League dinner on Friday night. Chris List took the Falcons in our little team draft, and then we have a straight up bet: Falcons versus Saints. Another straight up bet: Falcons versus. Oh God! Now I ruined the whole conversation here by forgetting about it there. But Commanders, Falcons versus Commanders. Straight up bets. Chris List on the side of the Falcons on both. I was surprised that it was 8.5, to be honest with you. I thought it should have been like 7.5. But I don't think their defense is that good.
No, I don't think so either. But they do have a pretty favorable schedule. I mean, the division is one thing, but as far as like one of their kind of rotational out of division games, they get the Commanders. That's a very winnable one. The Buccaneers, obviously they get twice. They get the Saints twice. They get the Panthers twice. They get the AFC South and the NFC North. Which are the AFC South is probably the second worst division in football, and then the NFC North. It's like I guess you're not going to feel great about the Lions game, but Green Bay, Chicago, Minnesota, those all feel like very beatable teams for Atlanta.
Yeah. Carolina Panthers, number 1 overall pick. They traded up to go get Bryce Young, but what does he have to work with? No DJ Moore, no Deonta Foreman, as we alluded to. They brought in some guys, but they're always like it's like the second tier guys at like every single position. I feel like they don't have that one playmaker for him.
Right.
They've got Miles Sanders, who they signed as a free agent. Eagles were more than happy letting him go. Adam Thielen, who seems like on the decline. DJ Chark, another guy that wasn't even able to break through, even with Jameson Williams out in Detroit. He was hurt a lot in his own right. Hayden Hurst, a solid year with the Bengals. I was unhappy when he left, but all these guys are like, none of these guys are like rainmakers.
No. Well, I mean, we haven't talked about Laviska Shenault, who is technically still on this roster.
That's true.
Or the ultimate rainmaker. Yeah, right. I mean, much like Houston, much like Indy, I mean, it all comes down to the quarterback, right? I mean, this is you could go 3-14, but if Bryce Young looks great in the majority of those games, it's a successful season for Carolina. But I think your assessment of the rest of the skill position guys is spot on. I actually kind of working the margins like they did. I liked the Miles Sanders edition a lot. I didn't love the Thielen edition. I just feel like he's kind of washed at this point. This feels like Blake Griffin going to the Pistons type of thing. Hayden Hurst to me was a nice budget signing. So I think they did what they could. I think they know that there's no reason to go all in when you have a rookie quarterback. I think you got to get that sorted out first before you try to map out the rest of your franchise. But the one thing that Bryce Young has that Anthony Richardson doesn't, and certainly CJ Stroud doesn't, is he has a really good defense on the other side, right? So I don't think they're not going to be asking Bryce Young necessarily to go score 30 points every game. I think he might not have the greatest pieces around him in year one, but I think he at least has the defense to fall back on.
I agree. And they actually buffeted that defense as well via free agency. They went out and signed Von Bell, for instance, stealing him from my Bengals, but I was really disappointed on that one there. Brian Burns is a huge part of that defense. We'll see what he brings to the table in year 2, or not year 2, but in this year after, getting hurt a little bit last
JC
year.
Horn too. JC Horn's played 16 total games through 2 years.
Yeah. That's another one to watch very closely there. But yeah, be interesting. I mean, hey, if they're bad for one more year, it wouldn't be the worst possible thing. They get their version of Jamar Chase in the draft next year. Would be nice to pair them up. That is a formula that could work. So we'll see what happens there. New Orleans Saints. Nick, this is a team I struggle to understand. I in a lot of different ways. Like, I don't understand what they're doing necessarily. I don't understand what we can expect from a lot of the key players. Let's start off with the decision to go get Derek Carr and spend big bucks on him. Is he that?
I don't think he's bad. I think he's probably an upgrade over what they had at quarterback last season. LASIK Jameis is still on this roster. I think he was supposed to be the guy last year, got hurt immediately, and it was just kind of low upside after that. So I view it as an upgrade. And, we could say we don't know what this team is doing, and yet they're fairly heavy favorites to win this division. And they're plus 120 right now. You got Atlanta 215, Carolina 4-1, Tampa Bay, who we haven't talked about yet, at 8-1. So they're in the driver's seat, despite kind of having this confusion direction. I mean, they're the team that just refuses to fully rebuild, right? You would think, someone like Sean Payton and Drew Brees going out the door, it's like, all right, this is our chance to reset. And they just continue to kick the can down the road and don't want to do that. I respect it in some ways, but at some point there's going to be a teardown coming. It's not happening this year. We'll see how the Kamara situation sorts out. I think that's kind of a free space one that we have to mention. Chris Olave, everybody loves him in year 2, and Michael Thomas, if you want to go down that road and have him on your team for the 5 games that he's active, be my guest.
That was on my list. Yep.
Right. Beyond that, it's Rashid Shaheed, it's Traquan Smith. That's about it in that receiving core. So if nothing else, I think that actually pushes me even more toward wanting to draft Chris Olave on more of my teams.
Yeah, but Olave dealt with an Achilles thing over the OTAs and mini camp there.
Yep.
Michael Thomas, how many? Yeah, what do you expect out of him? Kamara, how many games does he get suspended? Are you in on Jamal Williams being the goal line vulture again? Does Taysom Hill just continue to annoy the crap out of us? Lots of things. I just don't. Saints, I don't understand. They're tough.
Yeah. They are.
Yeah. All right. Last and probably least, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Sometimes we say last but not least. This time it might be least. Okay, let's start with this quarterback situation. Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield. I mean, Baker Mayfield was the last quarterback drafted in my Scott Fishbowl league, and it's super flex league, so every starting quarterback gets drafted. Yeah. I'm guessing he is the starter. Can he support Evans and Godwin for the prices that they're going at?
Well, you're getting him at a significant discount. I think Evans especially is the guy who I've usually found myself grabbing just because maybe there's kind of a paying for past production corollary going on there. But he's wide receiver 33 right now, Jeff. Yeah. I mean, that is wild. Oh, yeah. I mean, he's going like 20 picks later than someone like Christian Watson, who I think has a similarly scary quarterback situation. And yes, it feels like there's a lot more upside with Jordan Love, and that's probably right. But I mean, at some point the talent's going to win out. I don't think Mike Evans is to that point where I feel like he's washed up. I mean, last year was kind of a worst case scenario for Mike Evans. And, had it not been for that huge game at the end of the season against Carolina, 10 for 207 and 3 touchdowns, it would have looked a lot worse. So I think we have to keep that in mind. I mean, it felt like he totally bottomed out and still had a 1,100 yard season. But my question is, going from Tom Brady to whether it's Mayfield or Trask, what are we looking at in terms of volume? Because as disastrous as this offense was, stuck in the mud, I mean, they were like one of the worst teams to watch just as a football fan last year. It was maddening. Their third downs, they were horrible. They still led the NFL in pass attempts by a mile. I mean, they were one of only 2 teams to attempt 700 passes last season. Tom Brady was second in the NFL in passing yards behind Patrick Mahomes. So as frustrating as it was, as low scoring as this team was, in PPR leagues, Godwin and to a lesser degree Evans were still really, really productive. Going from Brady to Baker Mayfield, how much does this offense change in terms of just pure volume in the passing game?
Well, I mean, there were 700 attempts, but they were all 6 yards. I mean, it was one of those things that was super frustrating if you had Evans because he's a downfield guy.
Exactly.
And that's the thing that made it worse. And then of course he had that hideous drop against Carolina. That whole game goes differently, but for that, there's a lot of coulda, shoulda, wouldas out there when it comes to the Bucs. And I think those 2 specifically, you can still draft. I think, especially for the price for Evans, I'm in on that price. I'm in on the price of Rashad White too, by the way.
Yeah.
With Fournette gone, also unsigned. It's the first time we mentioned Fournette all pod here, and we talked about Elliott and Cook and where they haven't landed. Fournette has something left in the tank, and it's amazing to me that there's no buzz on him. But Rashad White should get a lot of catches. I think he should get a lot of just total touches. And I understand that they might be trailing and it's a bad offensive line, but as long as he's involved in the passing game, I don't really care.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on about that. I mean, we should mention that Evans and Godwin finished 17th and 19th respectively in PPR last year. So I mean, even if like 80% of the volume is there, I think there's some bounce back upside for Mike Evans. Like he's going, he's going like 16 wide receiver spots below that. I mean, he still had more catches last year than he'd had in any year since like 2018. So even though a lot of them were like 4 yards when you need 8 on third down, that still gives you a point in PPR leagues. So you got to keep that in mind. And on Fournette, you're right. I mean, there's all this talk about Dalvin Cook and Zeke and where those guys are going to land. Fournette's going to land somewhere, man. I mean, he's going to make an impact. I think New England to me is the team I would watch with Fournette. He just kind of seems like a Patriot at this point. I feel like he's entering his like LeGarrette Blount era.
Yeah, very well might be. And that is what, Dalvin's been mentioned there as well. So does that make you want to draft Stevenson a little less at the going rate?
I mean, a little bit. I actually just read like a half hour ago that the Pats are now the betting favorites to land Dalvin Cook. Not that means a whole lot, but they need depth, right? I mean, beyond Stevenson, it's Ty Montgomery and Pierre Strong. So like they're an obvious team to add somebody. And I mean, if whether it's Fournette or certainly if it's Dalvin Cook, that would make me feel worse about who I can't get this out of my head. I know on the radio show last year, Jeff, we had somebody call in and pronounce it Ramador Stevenson. Oh. So that's just how I always read it now. Ramador Stevenson.
Why not?
But I love him so much as a player that like I almost don't want them to add a key depth piece like Fournette.
Right. But that's kind of a hanky little zone there. Right after, you got Jacobs, Stevenson, Najee Harris, Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall, all in that grouping there.
Yep.
All reasons that you could be a little squeamish, a little squishy on the asking price. But you know what? We'll delve into all that. We got future podcasts here. We did go the full hour and a half as we, 94 minutes, not 64.
Look, man, Sorry, we knew what was going to happen.
Yeah, we did too. But hey guys, thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks to all of our sponsors for chiming in. We appreciate you guys. We'll name them by name, which is just our sponsors. But thanks to Circa, thanks to Reality Sports Online and Fantrax, and of course the Blue Wire Network. Thanks to you guys for listening. Nick and I will be back at you every Monday through the Super Bowl. So thanks for tuning in. Take care.